Hey guys, welcome to a tutorial for React Context API. So Context API is something that's very important and very effective when using state. It gives you the ability to add global variables, state variables to your application. And it's a very important thing to know when you're building apps on a bigger scale. Now, this tutorial has TypeScript in mind because if you've used Context API before, when you use it with normal React, there's not really much you have to do. It's just a simple hook that you have to import. But with TypeScript, there's a little more complexity added because TypeScript starts giving errors and warnings when in certain situations that become difficult to avoid if you don't know how to fix them. So just get started with context. Let's first create a folder called context. Inside context, I'm going to make a file called use context. So this is our context hook. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it use context. I also have a small UI here. We're going to test out our state by incrementing this 0 or adding numbers into it by pressing the increment button. Right now it's hard-coded, if you can see. It's not really doing anything, but we're going to add state to it. So for this, you already have to know what use state does because if you're trying to figure out context, I'm pretty confident you already know what use state is because you have to know one before the other. If you're going to go global, you have to know the local version. So let's import React quickly. So import React. Now with TypeScript, there are a few things you have to do before creating context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an interface. You can use type, you can use interface, it doesn't matter. I'm going to call it context props. We're going to give it a prop called counter, which is of type number. These are our state variables. So counter is what I'm going to call my state variable as well. So make sure you use the same name as you would for your state. So the other one would be set counter. This would be a react.dispatch with the type number. They have to be the same. So if it's string here, it has to be string over here. In certain situations, you want to pass it on as a prop function or a callback. In those situations, you can just add a function at the start of the type. For example, if you're setting true or false states for Boolean values, it's not very required, but in certain situations, it depends on how you're writing the function. So next what I want to do is I want to create a object called initial values. This is going to have our state values. And we're going to give it the type context props. Now we're going to use the same name, so counter has an initial value of 0 and set counter, I'm typing horribly right now, has a value of undefined function. It's a function that's undefined because right now it's not doing anything. It starts off as undefined. Once we start passing in something, it's going to start functioning as a normal set function. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to create a context. Just a simple, you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it context. Then we're going to write React create context. This is a create context hook. We're going to pass in the initial values here. So now we've created a context that has these two values inside. Next, what I want to do is I want to write destructure from context the provider, the state provider basically, or the context provider. This is going to wrap around our entire app. Next, what I want to do is I want to make a functional component called use or context provider equals a function that is defined. So it's an empty function right now. Another thing we need to pass in is another interface that has width child props children as a prop inside. We're going to call this jsx.element. We're simply going to return the provider. Let's just copy it here. And inside provider, I'm going to first let's put with children here and call in the children prop. Inside, we're going to pass that prop, so children. And our provider needs a set of values. So it needs a value for state. Basically, this is an object that has all your different state values. So, for example, if you make a variable for the counter, as you see here, we need to pass these two into this object in order to get it to work. So it has to get all the state values in here. But what we're going to do is I'm going to create a separate object called values and just keep it empty for now. And just pass that in here. Right now it's going to give an error because obviously we need these two here since it's defined. But let's wait for that for now. Next, what I want to do is I want to start creating the state itself. So equals react dot use state. We're going to pass in the initial values dot counter here. And I'm quickly going to write counter and set counter. Now, I'm assuming you already know what this line means. It's just a simple state hook from React. We're setting a local state here. The initial value is just this counter over here. So whatever you add on, just pass in that initial value as the initial value. And next I'm going to write counter and set counter. And you see the red line is gone. Now, for the most part, this is where you can stop. You don't need to do anything else, and you already have context created. You can add the export keyword here. But I want to make this into a hook so that I don't have to call the use context hook every time I want to use these values. So in the same file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export const use context as a hook itself, as a separate function. Inside that function, I'm going to write const using the spread operator. I'm going to spread out the context itself. So use context with the context we made up here, this value basically. So what this function does is I'm basically telling it to destructure out all the values in this object into another object. You can just return it like this, but this is a better way of doing this. Next, I'm going to return that destructured state entirely. So everything that's inside these initial values is going to get returned by this function, and hit save. Now we have our state ready. So what we can do now is go into our main file and quickly import the context provider. This is this one right here, this main function with the children, and just wrap it around our whole app so that everything inside the app has access to these state variables. If you want to make the global state in a specific part of your website or app, you have to import the provider in that parent, like the main parent that has all those children with the functionality you want global state to be available to. So right now I just want my state to be available to the whole app, so I'm just wrapping it around everything. But you can wrap it around specific components. That way, and only the children of that component will have access to all this. Now what I can do is I can go back to my app, and here simply import use context. Oh, sorry, the other use context, this one. And I can, just like a normal object, I can just destructure out from use context the counter and the set state. set counter. Now let's pass that in here. So counter, you can see it still says 0. And next what I want to do is I want to give an on-click handler with the function set counter and just write counter plus 1. So this is basically telling it that every time I click on this button, I want the number to increment. So you can see I can increment this number. Now since I have this wrapped around the main app, I can just call this hook I made anywhere inside my app and just be able to destructure out the state variables without doing anything else. So I can just make another file and do the same thing like this, and I'll be able to have access to these state variables. And that's basically all there is. This is how you would use context API in a very simple way. You can obviously make more complex things. All you have to do is go back here and add those into the context props, the initial values, and just make a state for them and pass them into values. So whatever you add here, you have to add it here. So it's just going to give you a red line. So you'll know that you have to add it here. And that's basically it, guys. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like and thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.